The auditorium was already filled with the sound of voices, laughter, and nervous whispers when she quietly stepped inside. The grand piano stood at the center of the stage, shining under the bright lights. Around her, young people in stylish clothes chatted excitedly, holding their sheet music with confident smiles. She moved slowly, her plain gray dress brushing against her knees, her old handbag clutched tightly in her hands. She looked out of place among the glitter and sparkle of the audition crowd. She walked to the registration desk, her shoes clicking softly against the wooden floor. The woman at the desk barely looked up, just nodded after checking her name on the list. Her tone was polite but distant, like she didn't expect much from her. She thanked her quietly and walked toward the rows of seats where the other contestants were waiting. As she sat down, a few heads turned her way. Some whispered. Others just stared for a moment, then went back to their conversations, but not before letting out a small laugh. She could hear bits and pieces of what they said, words like old-fashioned and wrong place. She smiled faintly, pretending not to notice. She wasn't there to impress anyone with her looks. She came for something much deeper, something that had lived quietly inside her heart for years. The air in the hall felt heavy with competition. Young faces glowed with excitement, their fingers twitching as if they couldn't wait to touch the piano keys. A few of them were practicing silently on their laps, moving their fingers in invisible patterns. The woman watched them, admiring their energy. She remembered being like that once, full of dreams and plans, believing nothing could stand in her way. But life has its own rhythm. Years ago, when she was younger, she used to play the piano every day. It was her escape, her way of talking to the world. But when her father passed away suddenly, everything changed. Bills piled up and she had to give up her dream of studying music. She took a small job at a shop nearby, telling herself it was just for a short time. 1 year turned into many. Her piano gathered dust in the corner of her small apartment. The only music she heard was from the radio while she worked late nights, folding clothes and stacking shelves. Even then, she never completely gave up. Sometimes, when everyone was asleep, she would open her old piano, press the keys softly, and play a few tunes just for herself. It reminded her that a part of her was still alive. That part was quiet but stubborn. It refused to die. Now, sitting in that hall surrounded by people half her age, she wondered if she had done the right thing coming here. Her heart was racing. She could feel the weight of all those eyes that didn't believe in her, but she took a deep breath and told herself that courage was not about looking strong. It was about showing up even when you're scared. A tall young man sitting 2 rows ahead leaned toward his friend and whispered something while glancing back at her. They both laughed quietly. She heard them but kept her eyes fixed on the stage. She knew their laughter wasn't really about her. It was about their own insecurity, their fear of being less than someone they couldn't understand. The audition began. One by one, contestants were called to perform. Some played brilliantly, fingers flying over the keys with confidence. Others stumbled, their nerves getting the best of them. Each performance was followed by polite applause and short comments from the judges. She listened carefully to every note, every mistake, every emotion. Music was not just about playing fast or loud. It was about feeling, and that's what she planned to show when her turn came. Her hands rested on her lap, thin and slightly trembling. She looked at them and smiled softly. Those hands had done so much, worked through long nights, washed dishes, cared for her sick mother, carried groceries, and still somehow remembered every key of the piano. They weren't the hands of a beginner. They were the hands of a survivor. As the hours passed, the hall grew warmer. People shifted in their seats, some yawning, some nervously tapping their feet. Her number was still far down the list. She tried to stay calm, but her thoughts kept drifting back to her mother. Her mother used to sit in the small living room listening to her play. Even when she was tired, she would smile and say, "You were born to play, my dear. One day the world will listen." When her mother got sick, the music stopped for a while. The days were filled with doctor visits and hospital bills. The piano stayed covered under a sheet, silent like a closed chapter. Then one evening, while cleaning her mother's things after her passing, she found a folded flyer at the bottom of a drawer. It was an old audition announcement, the same one she had once dreamed of joining but never did. Her mother had kept it all those years. On the back of the paper in her mother's handwriting were the words, "You still can. That's why she was here now." not to prove anything to others, but to honor that love and belief that never left her. She looked around at the others again. Many were scrolling through their phones, some adjusting their makeup, others bragging about how long they'd practiced. She smiled gently. They were all nervous in their own way, hiding it behind confidence. When the announcer called out number 32, she checked her paper. It wasn't her turn yet. A few more to go. She stood up quietly and walked to the side of the hall where she could see the stage clearly. The contestant playing now was fast, precise, technically perfect, but there was something missing. It was beautiful but empty. The judges clapped politely but without much expression. She knew that feeling too well. Sometimes music can be flawless and still have no soul. She had learned that real beauty in music doesn't come from perfection. It comes from truth. Her number was called next. She froze for a second, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. She gathered her things, straightened her dress, and took a deep breath. The hall suddenly felt huge, and every step toward the stage felt heavier than the last. She could sense the curious eyes following her. Some people in the audience exchanged glances again, a few whispering under their breath. One of the young contestants muttered something like, "Let's see what she's got." But she ignored them all. She had waited too many years for this moment to let a few whispers shake her. As she reached the piano, she bowed politely to the judges. One of them, an older man with glasses, gave her a small nod but didn't say anything. She sat down on the piano bench, adjusted it slightly, and placed her old sheet music in front of her. Her hands hovered over the keys for a few seconds. The room was quiet. In that silence, she closed her eyes for a moment and remembered her mother's smile, the sound of rain against the window, and the feeling of her fingers dancing across the keys when she was young. Then she opened her eyes, calm and steady. She didn't look nervous anymore. Her fingers pressed the first key and a soft, pure sound filled the air. The room grew even quieter, as if the walls themselves were listening. Her touch was gentle but firm, each note carrying emotion that words could never express. The whispers stopped. Even the judges leaned forward slightly. She didn't look at the audience, didn't think about the people who laughed earlier. She just played, honestly, beautifully, like the music had always been part of her soul. Her mind was no longer in the hall. It was somewhere else, somewhere peaceful where dreams never got old and love never faded. The first few notes had already silenced the room, but as she continued, a deeper hush settled over everyone. The sound was soft at first, delicate, like the gentle rustling of leaves on a calm day. It was clear that her fingers were not just moving, they were speaking. Each note carried a memory, a feeling, a story that no one could ignore. People shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, trying to capture every sound. Even those who had laughed at her earlier found themselves frozen, unable to look away. She had chosen a piece that was not flashy, not meant to impress with speed or difficult fingerwork. It was a simple melody, but one that allowed her heart to shine through. She thought of all the years she had spent quietly practicing, hidden from the world, imagining what it would be like to play in front of an audience that mattered. Now those imagined moments were real, and she poured everything she had into the keys. Around her, the other contestants felt a strange mix of awe and unease. They had come expecting competition, but this was something different. It was not about talent alone. It was about feeling, about courage, about every small struggle that had brought her here. One young woman in the third row, who had been chatting and checking her phone just moments ago, suddenly straightened and pressed her lips together. She could not believe what she was hearing. A few judges leaned closer, resting their elbows on the table, their pens paused in midair. They had seen many auditions before, some with technically perfect performances, others with a touch of emotion, but this was raw, human, unforgettable. Each chord she struck seemed to carry a piece of her life, a quiet story of sacrifice and hope that could not be faked. Her mind drifted slightly as she played. She remembered the evening she spent in her small apartment when no one was around. The room had been quiet except for the faint ticking of a clock and the sound of rain against the window. She would sit at her old piano, the same piece she was playing now, letting her fingers move as if they were painting her soul on the air. Those moments were hers alone, small islands of freedom in a life full of responsibilities. She thought of her mother, who had always encouraged her music. Even when life became hard, her mother had smiled and said, "Music will find its way back to you." Those words had stayed with her, even when she had nearly given up hope. Every note she played now was a tribute to that love, a way of honoring the person who had believed in her long before anyone else did. The young man who had whispered and laughed at her earlier sat rigid in his chair. His confident smirk had disappeared, replaced by a mixture of shock and awe. He had been practicing difficult scales for months, expecting to shine at this audition. Yet here was someone who had never seemed to fit in, playing in a way that left him speechless. For the first time, he realized that confidence alone did not make talent, and appearance certainly did not measure courage or heart. Time seemed to slow as she moved through the piece. Her hands were steady, even though her heart was racing inside her chest. She felt a warmth spreading through her body, a quiet thrill that came from doing something she had longed to do for years. She was no longer a plain woman in a crowded hall. She was a storyteller, a messenger, a musician. Every sound that left the piano was a message, not just to the judges, but to everyone who had doubted her, to herself, and to the memory of her mother. Some of the audience members had tears in their eyes. One older woman near the back whispered softly to her companion, "She's remarkable." The words were almost lost in the music, but they were there, and they carried a truth that no one could deny. It was impossible not to feel the honesty in her playing. This was not practice or performance, it was life poured out through sound. She remembered the difficult years, the lonely nights, the people who had doubted her ability or discouraged her dreams. She had heard them all, felt their judgment, and yet she had never let it stop her completely. Every challenge she had faced had built something stronger inside her. A quiet resilience, a sense that even if the world mocked her, her music could speak for her. Now on this stage, that inner strength was shining through every note. As she played, she noticed a few of the contestants exchanging nervous glances. Their confident chatter had vanished. Some had even stopped fidgeting with their sheet music, unable to look down for fear of missing a single note. The same hands that had once tapped impatiently on the table were now resting, rigid, eyes wide. It was as if her music had created a pause in time, a moment where nothing else mattered but the beauty unfolding before them. The judges, too, were captivated. One of them, who usually scribbled comments quickly, had set his pen down entirely, leaning forward to watch her hands move across the keys. He had judged countless auditions over decades, but rarely had he seen someone convey so much with such subtlety. The room was full of talent, but talent with a story behind it. Talent born from experience, struggle, and persistence was something entirely different. Her mind wandered again to her past. She remembered the times she had played in empty rooms, practicing in secret while everyone else slept. She thought of the small victories, the tiny improvements that had felt enormous to her at the time. She thought of the day she had found the audition flyer, hidden away like a secret, waiting for her to come back. It had felt like a sign, like her mother had left her a gift. That gift had brought her here to this moment to show the world that music belongs not to those who look the part, but to those who feel it. The music swelled, not with speed or volume, but with intensity. Each note carried more emotion than the last, and the quiet hall seemed to vibrate with it. She could feel the energy of the room shifting. People who had been skeptical, even mocking, were now leaning forward, caught in the web of her music. Her hands were no longer just fingers on keys. They were conduits of her soul, telling a story that no words could capture. When she reached the middle of the piece, she closed her eyes briefly. She allowed herself to remember the small apartment where she had practiced for years, the nights when she had almost given up, the quiet encouragement of her mother, and the determination that had brought her back to this moment. Each note became a step on that journey, a reminder of everything she had endured and overcome. A young contestant sitting near the aisle had tears running down his face. He had come expecting competition, maybe even victory, but instead he was confronted with something far more powerful, something real. It was humbling and inspiring, and he realized how shallow his earlier judgments had been. She had arrived quietly, without flashy clothes or loud confidence, yet she had conquered the room with truth, not showmanship. By the time she reached the last few measures, the room was utterly silent. Even the janitor standing near the back had stopped sweeping, mesmerized by the music. The sound of the piano carried not just her story, but the universal story of anyone who had struggled, been underestimated, and kept going despite everything. Her final note lingered, soft and steady, a gentle reminder that courage and passion could not be ignored. The silence hung for a few seconds longer, long enough for everyone to realize what they had just witnessed. Then slowly the first clap sounded. It was soft, almost hesitant, as if no one wanted to break the spell. But soon the applause grew louder, filling the room with cheers, whistles, and cries of admiration. People were on their feet, some clapping with tears in their eyes, others simply staring in awe. She remained seated for a moment, letting the energy of the room wash over her. She had done it. Not perfectly, not flawlessly, but truly, honestly, and beautifully. She had spoken with her music and the world had listened. For years she had waited for this moment, and now it was here. As she finally stood and bowed to the judges, she felt a wave of relief and joy. The same people who had doubted her, who had whispered and laughed, were now clapping with respect. She caught a few of their eyes, and in that moment, there was understanding. They had learned something important. Appearances and first impressions could be deceiving. True talent came from dedication, heart, and courage. The judges exchanged quiet words among themselves, nodding in approval. One of them smiled warmly and said something to his colleague, and she caught a glimpse of admiration in his eyes. She didn't need their praise. The music itself was her reward, but she accepted it graciously, knowing that she had given everything she had to this moment. As she stepped down from the stage, some contestants approached her, hesitant at first, then with genuine respect. "That was incredible," one whispered. "I didn't expect that at all." She smiled politely, feeling no bitterness toward those who had doubted her. Their surprise was not her problem. She had proven something far more important. She had proven to herself that her dream had never truly died. She walked back to her seat, feeling lighter than she had in years. The weight of doubt, fear, and years of waiting seemed to lift off her shoulders. Her hands still trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the intensity of the experience. She touched them softly, as if thanking them for carrying her through this journey. The rest of the contestants continued their auditions, but she no longer felt part of that competition. She had done what she came to do. The music had spoken and nothing else mattered. She realized something profound. It was never about winning or losing, about applause or... After her performance, the hall seemed to vibrate with a quiet energy that no one could ignore. People whispered among themselves, unable to shake the feeling that they had just witnessed something extraordinary. The other contestants looked at her with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Some avoided her gaze, embarrassed at their earlier laughter, while others stared openly, trying to understand how someone so plain and quiet could hold such power over the room with just a piano. She sat quietly in her seat, her hands folded on her lap, feeling a gentle warmth in her chest. It was not pride exactly, but a deep sense of calm satisfaction. She had done what she had set out to do. She had poured every bit of herself into the music, and now the world had seen it, felt it. She realized that the applause, the admiration, even the surprise of others, it was secondary. The real victory was the courage to show her true self, unafraid, unhidden, and honest. The judges exchanged glances, their faces showing something more than professional evaluation. They were impressed, certainly, but also moved. One of them, a middle-aged woman with a kind expression, leaned over to her colleague and whispered, "I haven't felt this way about a performance in years. There's so much emotion behind it." Her colleague nodded, his eyes still fixed on the woman who had just returned to her seat. They scribbled a few notes, but the excitement in their voices betrayed their usual composure. This was more than technical skill. It was life itself expressed in sound. The other contestants were having mixed reactions. Some were inspired, feeling a renewed determination to push themselves harder. Others were confused and frustrated, realizing that their polished technique and flawless execution could not match the depth of feeling she had conveyed. One young man, who had practiced for months, sat slouched in his chair staring at the piano with a frown. He had believed that speed, precision, and showmanship were the keys to success, but he now understood that those things alone could not touch the soul. She watched them quietly, listening to the faint murmurs and gasps around her. She felt no bitterness toward those who had doubted her. Their surprise was not her burden. In fact, their reactions made her smile softly. It reminded her that people often judge others based on appearances, forgetting that real strength and beauty are rarely visible at first glance. Her life had been proof of that lesson, and now so was her music. As the auditions continued, she noticed a few contestants who were struggling to focus. Their earlier confidence had vanished, replaced by a sense of vulnerability. She understood that feeling well. She had experienced it herself many times in her life whenever she had doubted her own abilities or feared failure. But she also knew that fear could be transformed into strength if one chose to face it, rather than hide. That was what she had done today, and that choice had changed everything. Between performances, she reflected on her journey. Music had been with her through every hardship. When she had lost her father, the piano had been her solace. When her mother had grown ill, she had found a quiet refuge in practicing at night, even when exhaustion threatened to overtake her. The years of waiting, of sacrificing dreams for survival, had not diminished her love for music. They had deepened it, given it layers of meaning that only experience could provide. She remembered the day she had found the audition flyer tucked away in her mother's drawer. It had been a simple piece of paper, yellowed and creased with age, but it carried a message that had awakened something she thought was lost forever. Her mother had believed in her, even when circumstances had forced her to put aside her dreams. That belief had been a gentle nudge, a reminder that passion never truly dies. It had been enough to make her take this step, to face the world once again with nothing but her music and her courage. As the next contestant prepared to perform, she looked around the hall again. Some faces were full of admiration, others full of envy. She noticed a young woman practicing on her knees, silently moving her fingers across imaginary keys, trying to emulate the emotion she had just witnessed. The plain, quiet woman who had seemed unremarkable minutes ago was now a benchmark, a source of inspiration without ever intending to be. She reflected on the irony of the situation. People had judged her before she played, dismissing her because of her appearance, her age, her quiet demeanor. They had assumed she had nothing to offer. And yet here she was, demonstrating a truth that transcended all those assumptions. Talent and heart are not measured by looks, confidence, or superficial charm. They are measured by persistence, passion, and the willingness to show oneself fully, even when the world expects otherwise. Her thoughts drifted again to the years she had spent hidden from the world, practicing in her small apartment late at night. She could see herself sitting at that old piano, tired hands brushing the keys, eyes closed, imagining a world where her music mattered. Those nights had been lonely, yes, but they had also been formative. Each note she played now carried the essence of those quiet, determined moments. They were a testament to resilience, to never letting go of what truly defines one's spirit. As the auditions proceeded, she noticed that the mood in the room had changed. Contestants who had once been brash and boastful were now quieter, more thoughtful. The energy was no longer one of casual competition, but of careful observation. Everyone wanted to learn something from her performance, even if they could not articulate it. It was as if her music had created a new language in the room, one that spoke of honesty, struggle, and beauty beyond appearances. She felt a gentle thrill in realizing how far she had come. There had been moments of doubt earlier, moments when she had wondered if she was too late, if the years of waiting had made her too ordinary to matter. But as she watched the reactions of those around her, she understood that ordinary appearances could hide extraordinary talent. And extraordinary talent was not about showiness, it was about sincerity, about giving everything you had no matter the circumstances. During a brief pause, she allowed herself to glance around at the audience. Some were nodding quietly. Others whispered to their neighbors, clearly moved. Even the janitors and ushers who had been silently observing had expressions of surprise and admiration. The music had transcended every boundary, reaching people who had expected nothing from her. That realization filled her with a quiet joy, not pride but a sense of fulfillment she had not felt in years. The next performer stepped onto the stage, but she found herself barely noticing. Her mind was still full of the music she had played, the emotions she had poured into it, and the reactions of the people who had witnessed it. She realized that her performance had not just affected others. It had affected her too. It had reminded her of the strength she carried inside, the resilience that had sustained her through difficult years, and the love for music that had never wavered. A judge approached her after the next round, a small smile on their face. "You played with incredible honesty," they said softly. "It's rare to see someone convey so much feeling without relying on technique alone. You have something very special." She nodded politely, Her heart warmed by the acknowledgement but not seeking it. She had already received the most important affirmation by daring to play, by choosing to be seen. She observed the other contestants again. Some had started to adjust their approach, practicing quietly with more attention to emotion, less concern with speed or technical perfection. Others were still focused on skill alone, but the room had undeniably shifted. A lesson had been imparted, unspoken but powerful. True music comes from the heart, not just the hands. As she waited for her next turn or comments, she thought of her mother again. The belief her mother had carried for so long had guided her here, had given her the courage to take the step that seemed impossible. She felt a deep connection to that love, a reminder that support and encouragement can travel beyond years, beyond absence, beyond time itself. Her mother's faith had been a beacon, and now she was walking toward it, following its light onto the stage of her own life. The whispers and quiet conversations in the hall continued, but she no longer noticed them with fear or self-doubt. Instead, she heard them as a chorus of humanity, each voice reflecting the surprise and wonder of ordinary people encountering extraordinary courage. She understood that her performance had shifted the energy of the room, had opened hearts, and had created a moment of shared humanity that would linger far longer than any applause. Finally, as the last notes from another contestant faded, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The journey was far from over. She had proven something essential, but this was just the beginning. The path ahead would still have challenges, still have skeptics and doubters, but she had learned that those things could not define her. Her music, her courage, and her persistence would continue to speak louder than any judgment or criticism. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, breathing in the quiet energy of the room. Every face, every reaction, every small gesture of surprise or admiration had left an imprint on her. She realized that music was not only a personal journey, it was a bridge between souls. It could convey truth and emotion in a way words often could not. And in that moment she felt connected to everyone present, from the judges to the contestants to the quiet audience members watching from the back rows. When her turn came again, the room seemed to hold its breath. The woman walked slowly toward the piano, her steps steady but quiet, carrying nothing with her but the sheet music she had brought from home. The air felt charged, as if everyone in the hall sensed that this performance would be different. The contestants who had once laughed now looked away nervously, unsure what to expect. Even some of the judges leaned forward slightly, their curiosity evident in their expressions. She settled onto the piano bench, adjusting her posture with care. Her hands hovered above the keys for a moment, as though she were listening to an invisible melody inside her own mind. She took a deep breath, letting the anticipation and the memories flow through her. This was more than just a performance. This was years of longing, sacrifice, and quiet determination distilled into sound. She pressed the first key and a soft, trembling note filled the hall. The melody was gentle at first, almost hesitant, but each note grew stronger, more confident, carrying layers of emotion that words could never capture. She had chosen a piece that spoke of patience, hope, and resilience. The music was not flashy, not meant to impress with speed or technical skill alone. It was about feeling, the kind of feeling that could move people, touch hearts, and linger long after the sound had faded. From the very first measures, the audience was captivated. Even the contestants who had scoffed at her earlier were now leaning forward, their eyes wide with surprise. One young woman clutched her sheet music tightly, as if it could somehow guide her through the emotions that were washing over her. The room was silent except for the piano, yet the silence itself was full of tension and anticipation. Every ear in the hall was attuned to the notes flowing from her hands. The judges, usually reserved and measured, were visibly moved. One of them, a man who had seen hundreds of auditions over decades, pressed his hands together and rested his chin on them, completely absorbed. Another, a woman with a stern expression, leaned forward with her eyes closed, letting the music reach her in a way that transcended analysis or critique. It was not only her skill but her honesty that held them spellbound. She allowed herself to feel the music as she played. Her mind drifted back to the long nights of practice in her small apartment, when the world was asleep and she would sit at the piano, letting her fingers speak the words her voice could not. She remembered the days when she had felt invisible, overlooked, and doubted by everyone around her. Those memories were no longer heavy. They were fuel for the music, giving each note a weight and depth that could not be manufactured. As the melody unfolded, she noticed subtle reactions around the hall. Some contestants wiped their eyes discreetly. Others were leaning forward with open mouths, stunned into silence. Even the janitors and ushers, usually unnoticed, were watching intently, their expressions softened by the power of the performance. It was as if the music had reached beyond the physical space, touching each person in a personal and profound way. Her fingers moved gracefully over the keys, each one precise but imbued with emotion. She did not rush, did not try to impress with speed or complexity. Instead, she let the music breathe, letting it rise and fall naturally like the rhythm of life itself. The hall was filled with a kind of magic, an invisible connection that bound everyone together in a shared experience. In the audience, a young man who had previously whispered jokes about her now sat completely still, eyes wide and mouth slightly open. He had thought he understood talent, confidence, and performance, but he was realizing how little he truly knew. True talent, he now understood, was not about appearances or bravado. It was about courage, passion, and the ability to pour one's soul into something without fear of judgment. The middle of the piece brought a sudden intensity. Her hands moved faster now, yet each note remained clear, deliberate, and full of feeling. She had learned to let her emotions guide her fingers rather than control them. This was not a mechanical recital. It was a conversation between her heart and the world. The energy in the room shifted with every chord, every delicate pause, and every crescendo. The judges exchanged quiet, awed glances. One of them scribbled notes furiously, but the expression on their face showed that they were thinking beyond technique. This was more than just a piano performance, it was a revelation, a glimpse into a life lived with quiet resilience and unwavering love for music. One judge whispered to another, "I haven't felt this moved in years." The other nodded solemnly, unable to find words. Her mind drifted again to her past, to the countless hours spent in an empty apartment, practicing for no audience at all. She had wondered if any of it would ever matter. She had wondered if she had wasted her talent, if her dreams had died along with the years she had lost. But now, sitting at that piano, she realized that every sacrifice, every quiet struggle, every moment of doubt had led her to this point. It had shaped her hands, her heart, and her music. The climax of the piece approached, and she let herself feel the full weight of everything she had endured. Her fingers flew across the keys with a controlled intensity, each note resonating with the experiences of her life: love, loss, perseverance, and hope. The audience felt it too, their breaths caught in their throats, their hearts moving with the rhythm of the music. Some could not stop the tears that welled up in their eyes. A few contestants who had been confident earlier now looked shaken. They had underestimated her, dismissed her quietly, and yet she had proven something that could not be ignored. The woman at the piano had shown them that skill without heart was empty, that appearances were meaningless, and that courage could shine brighter than confidence or showmanship. Their previous mockery felt shallow and meaningless in the face of what they were witnessing. As the final notes approached, she allowed herself a moment of calm. The music softened, slowing to a gentle, lingering conclusion. Each note seemed to hang in the air, as if the room itself was reluctant to let it go. She had played with all of herself, leaving nothing behind. Every memory, every emotion, every quiet hope and dream had found its way into the melody. When the last note faded, silence fell over the hall. It was a silence heavy with awe, respect, and wonder. The audience could hardly believe what they had just heard. For a few heartbeats, no one moved, no one spoke, and the world seemed to pause. Even the air felt different, charged with the energy of a performance that had transcended ordinary expectations. Then slowly, the first clap rang out. It was soft, tentative, as if no one wanted to break the spell, but it was followed by another and another until the entire hall erupted into applause. People stood, some shouting their admiration, others crying quietly. The judges were on their feet, clapping with genuine appreciation. One of them, a man who had always maintained a professional distance, smiled broadly, eyes glistening, and whispered, "That was extraordinary." She sat quietly, bowing her head slightly, allowing the audience to express their awe. She felt a warmth spread through her chest, not from pride, but from a sense of deep fulfillment. For years, she had been invisible, overlooked, and underestimated. Now, for the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Not for her appearance, not for her age, not for anything superficial, but for the courage and truth she carried inside her. Contestants who had once laughed approached her slowly, their faces a mixture of embarrassment and admiration. One whispered, I didn't expect that. It was incredible. Another simply shook their head in disbelief. She smiled politely, not out of vanity but from understanding. Their surprise was natural. People often fail to see what lies beneath the surface. She had never played for approval, only for truth, and that was enough. The hall buzzed with conversation as people shared their reactions. Some spoke of the technical skill, others of the emotion, but everyone agreed on one thing. She had changed the room, had transformed the energy in a way that few performers ever could. Even those who had doubted her felt humbled, inspired, and a little ashamed for underestimating her. She took a moment to breathe, feeling the significance of what had just happened. The performance had been more than music. It had been a statement, a testament to resilience, perseverance, and the quiet strength of someone who refused to give up on their dreams. It was a reminder that talent and heart are more important than appearances or judgments. As she stepped down from the stage, the applause followed her, echoing through the hall. People approached her with smiles, nods, and words of admiration. Some simply shook their heads in wonder. Unable to articulate what they had felt, she returned to her seat, feeling a quiet sense of victory. It was not a victory of competition or applause, but a victory of being true to herself, of allowing her music to speak, and of sharing her story without fear. For the first time in many years, she felt completely at peace. The doubts, the struggles, the years of waiting, they all seemed to fall away, leaving only the joy of doing what she loved. The experience had reminded her that courage is not loud or flashy. It is quiet, patient, and persistent. It is the willingness to show up, even when the world doubts you, and in that moment she had shown up beautifully. The applause continued to echo through the hall, but for her, it had already faded into something quieter, more personal. She returned to her seat, sitting calmly as if nothing had happened. Though her heart still thumped with a mix of relief and exhilaration, she knew she had given everything she could in that performance, and that was enough. Yet as she looked around, she realized that the impact of her music was not fading. If anything, it was growing. The contestants, many of whom had once whispered and laughed at her, now avoided eye contact, some nervously fiddling with their sheet music. Others stared openly, unable to look away from someone who had just reminded them that courage, perseverance, and sincerity can outshine years of training or appearances. One young woman whispered to her neighbor, "I can't believe she's been underestimated like that. I never imagined someone could play with so much soul." Even the judges, who had seen countless auditions, were still speaking in hushed tones. Their usual analytical expressions had softened, replaced by genuine admiration. One of the judges, a woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for being tough, shook her head slowly, her lips pressed together in a quiet smile. "There's something about her," she said. "It's not just skill, it's honesty, experience, heart. It's the kind of music that stays with you." The older man beside her nodded. Yes, it's rare to see someone convey life itself in a performance. She didn't just play the piano. She told a story. His words hung in the air, resonating with everyone who could hear them. They were right. She had not merely performed. She had shared pieces of her life, her struggles, her quiet victories, and her unspoken dreams. As the hall slowly returned to its usual hum, she reflected on what had just happened. She remembered all the years of playing alone in her apartment, the nights when she had questioned whether anyone would ever hear her music. She remembered the countless sacrifices, the moments when she had hidden her dreams behind practical duties and responsibility, and now all those years of patience, resilience, and persistence had culminated in this single moment of recognition. Not just from the judges, but from everyone who had witnessed her. Some of the contestants approached her cautiously, as if walking into unknown territory. One young man who had been brash and cocky before her performance spoke first. I didn't expect that," he said, his voice low and hesitant. "I thought I was prepared. I thought I understood what talent was. But I was wrong." She gave him a gentle nod, acknowledging his honesty without judgment. She had no need to gloat. Her music had already said everything that needed to be said. Another contestant, a young woman, approached with tears glistening in her eyes. That was beautiful, she whispered. I've never felt music like that before. I've practiced for years, but I never knew it could feel like that. She smiled softly, feeling a warmth in her chest. This was why she played. Why she had endured years of obscurity and doubt. Not for fame, not for applause, but for moments like this, when someone else's heart could be touched by her own. Even the audience members who had been quietly observing seemed transformed. Some whispered to their companions about the raw emotion they had witnessed. Others simply stared in awe, unable to articulate the impact her music had on them. It was as if her performance had opened a small window into something larger, something universal. The quiet triumph of perseverance, the beauty of honesty, and the power of showing one's true self without fear. The judges eventually returned to the table, still speaking quietly among themselves. They took a few notes, exchanged glances, and then looked back at her with renewed attention. It was clear that her performance had left a lasting impression. One judge, a man who rarely smiled, leaned back in his chair and let out a soft exhale. "She reminds us why we do this work," he said. "It's not about perfection. It's about life, and she plays it better than most." She absorbed their words silently, feeling a gentle pride, not the kind that seeks recognition, but the kind that quietly affirms the choices she had made. She had stayed true to herself. Even when the world doubted her, she had chosen to perform not for approval, but for the love of music and the memory of her mother, who had believed in her when no one else had. That love had carried her through, and now it had reached the hearts of everyone in that room. Outside the hall, the energy had shifted as well. Some contestants who had been preparing for their auditions were now hesitant, unsure how to follow someone who had played with such honesty and depth. Their confidence had been shaken, replaced by a realization that skill alone could not measure a person's true potential. Others found inspiration, a renewed determination to practice with heart and sincerity, understanding that the most important part of music was not speed or precision, but the story and emotion behind it. She noticed a few contestants quietly practicing on the sidelines, trying to emulate what they had just witnessed. They did not mimic the notes exactly. Instead, they tried to capture the feeling, the essence of truth and passion that had radiated from her performance. It was a small victory, not for recognition, but for influence, for inspiring others to seek authenticity in their own craft. Back in the main hall, some audience members approached the judges to ask about her. "Who is she?" One whispered. "I've never seen anyone play like that before." The judges shared quiet smiles, exchanging stories about her calm demeanor and her quiet confidence. They knew that her talent was rare, not just in technical skill, but in the depth of feeling and experience she brought to every note. She herself remained quietly in her seat, absorbing the moment. She thought of all the people who had doubted her, who had whispered and laughed, and she felt no anger. Their surprise and admiration now were part of a larger lesson, one she had learned long ago, that the opinions of others could not define her. True validation came from within, from knowing that she had given her all, from understanding that her journey, her struggles, and her perseverance were what made her music resonate so deeply. Her mind drifted back to her mother again, and a soft smile appeared on her face. She could imagine her mother sitting in the corner of the hall, smiling proudly, silently clapping along with every note. That memory alone was enough to fill her with a quiet joy. It reminded her that support, love, and belief in someone can last far longer than we realize, guiding us even when we feel unseen or forgotten. As the rest of the day's auditions progressed, it became clear that her performance had changed the atmosphere. Contestants approached the piano with a different mindset, more mindful of emotion, more willing to let themselves feel rather than merely execute. The audience had been reminded that music was not simply an exhibition of skill, but a vessel for the human experience. The woman had shown them the power of vulnerability, courage, and authenticity, and it had left an indelible mark. Between performances, a few of the judges came over to speak to her quietly. "You have a gift," one said, "not just with your hands, but with your heart. That is rare." Another nodded, adding, "Your story is as important as your music. You've reminded us why we love this art form." She accepted their words with humility, feeling more gratitude than pride. She knew that her journey had been long and difficult, but every moment had prepared her for this day. Later, as she packed her sheet music and prepared to leave, some contestants approached once more, this time with genuine curiosity rather than embarrassment or awe. "How did you stay so calm?" one asked. "How did you play with so much feeling?" She smiled gently, answering quietly, "I played from my life, from everything I've been through. That's what makes music matter." They nodded thoughtfully, realizing that there was no shortcut to what she had accomplished, only patience, dedication, and honesty. Walking out of the hall, she felt a lightness she had not known in years. The doubts, the years of waiting, the quiet fears that had lingered in the corners of her mind, they all felt smaller now, insignificant compared to the fulfillment she carried. She had faced the world and played her truth, and in doing so, she had not only proven her own courage but had inspired others to see beyond appearances and expectations. The sun had begun to set, casting a warm glow across the street outside the auditorium. She paused for a moment, breathing in the cool evening air, and allowed herself to reflect on the journey that had brought her here. Every quiet night, every sacrifice, every moment of unseen practice had led to this day. She had been invisible once, underestimated and overlooked, but her music had spoken louder than any doubt or judgment. Even in the days to come, she knew that the story of her performance would linger in the hearts of those who had witnessed it. The contestants would remember her courage, the audience would remember the emotion, and the judges would remember the honesty. And she would carry it with her, a reminder that life rewards those who persist, those who stay true to their passions, and those who dare to show their heart when the world least expects it. The days following the audition were filled with a strange kind of quiet excitement. Word had spread about the woman who had silenced a room with her piano. People spoke of her with reverence, sharing stories of the raw emotion and courage she had shown. Contestants who had once doubted her now approached her with curiosity, admiration, and sometimes awkward apologies. The experience had left a deep impression on everyone who had witnessed it, and she felt the subtle shift in the air wherever she went. She returned home that evening, carrying with her a sense of peace she had not felt in years. The small apartment she lived in felt warmer, brighter somehow. She set her sheet music carefully on the piano and sat for a moment, letting her hands rest on the keys. She could still feel the echoes of the performance in her fingers, a soft, lingering vibration that reminded her of what had been achieved. It was not about recognition, applause, or validation from others. It was about the truth of her music and the courage she had shown by sharing it. Letters and messages began to arrive soon after, some from people she did not know, expressing gratitude and admiration. One elderly woman wrote about how the performance had reminded her of the music her late daughter used to play, and how it had brought back precious memories. Another note came from a young student who confessed that she had been discouraged from pursuing music because of fear and doubt, but seeing the woman play had inspired her to try again. Each message was a gentle reminder of the impact one person could have by staying true to their passion. The judges from the audition reached out as well. They invited her to participate in workshops, small concerts, and collaborative projects, recognizing not just her technical skill, but the emotional depth she brought to her performances. She accepted some invitations cautiously, knowing that her focus was not on fame or accolades, but on music itself. The opportunities were meaningful, however, not because of the recognition, but because they allowed her to share her story and touch more hearts with her music. Her neighbors noticed a subtle change too. They saw her walking with a quieter confidence, a soft smile on her face, carrying herself with a dignity that was both gentle and firm. Some had always known her dedication to music, but now they understood the depth of her talent and the strength of her perseverance. Children in the building sometimes peeked through the windows to watch her play, wide-eyed and amazed by the sound she coaxed from the piano. Even strangers stopped briefly to listen when her music floated down the hallway, and she realized that her gift could reach far beyond the walls of the auditorium. The woman began to reflect on her journey more often, thinking about how far she had come from the days of quiet practice in her tiny apartment. She remembered the evenings when she had felt invisible, when the world seemed indifferent, and yet she had continued because the music was a part of her, and she could not abandon it. Every moment of doubt, every small sacrifice, had shaped her into someone capable of giving a performance that would resonate with so many people. One afternoon, she received an invitation to perform at a community concert. It was not a grand stage, but it was an opportunity to share her music with people who might not have experienced anything like it before. She accepted, feeling a quiet thrill. This was not about recognition. It was about connection, about allowing her music to touch lives, just as her own life had been touched by music through the years. When the day of the concert arrived, she arrived early, taking a few moments to sit quietly at the piano, letting the familiarity of the keys remind her of all the hours she had spent preparing in solitude. The audience began to fill the room, and she could see the anticipation in their faces. Some were familiar with her story, some were strangers who had heard her music before, and others were simply curious. She did not need to impress them with technique or showmanship. She only needed to be herself. As she began to play, the familiar hush fell over the room. Her music was gentle at first, a soft embrace that invited listeners to pause and listen. Each note was deliberate, flowing naturally from her fingers. She did not rush. She did not try to dominate the space. Instead, she allowed the music to breathe, letting every emotion find its place in the melody. The audience was silent, captivated not by the complexity of her playing, but by the authenticity and honesty that resonated in every note. As the piece unfolded, she noticed subtle reactions in the audience. Some were leaning forward, holding their breath, completely absorbed in the music. Others had tears in their eyes, their emotions stirred by the depth and sincerity of the performance. She smiled softly, feeling a quiet satisfaction. This was what she had always wanted. Not applause, not fame, but the ability to move others, to touch hearts with her music. After the concert, people approached her with words of gratitude and admiration. One woman spoke softly. "Your music reminded me of the strength I forgot I had. Thank you." A young boy held out his small hand and said, "I want to play the piano like you someday." She knelt down to his level, smiling gently. "You will," she said. "If you keep practicing and never give up, you will." Those words were not just advice. They were a reflection of the path she had taken and the hope she carried for others. Her life slowly began to change, not in grand or dramatic ways, but in small, meaningful moments. She found invitations to perform at local events, teaching opportunities, and collaborations with other musicians who appreciated not only her skill, but her authenticity. She became a quiet inspiration for those around her, showing that perseverance, courage, and sincerity could open doors that talent alone might not. The woman also began to teach a few students privately. She enjoyed watching them discover the piano and express themselves through music. Some were shy, some were hesitant, and some were full of energy and confidence. But she treated each of them with patience and kindness. She encouraged them to play from their hearts, to find the story in the music, and to embrace their mistakes as part of the journey. She found joy in nurturing others just as her mother had nurtured her, and realized that her own journey had prepared her for this role. One day, as she walked past a music store window, she saw a poster for an upcoming concert series. The headline featured her name, and she felt a flutter of nervous excitement. She paused for a moment, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here, from quiet practice in a small apartment to the stage that had once seemed so intimidating, to recognition and respect she had never sought, but had earned through courage and perseverance. Despite the new opportunities, she remained grounded. She knew that success was not measured by applause or recognition, but by the ability to stay true to oneself and to keep sharing one's passion. Her music had always been a reflection of her heart, and she continued to play not for others, but for the joy and fulfillment it brought her, and those who listened with open hearts. Letters and notes continued to arrive, some from students she had never met, expressing how her story had inspired them to follow their dreams. Each message was a reminder that one person's courage and honesty could create ripples far beyond what they imagined. She realized that her life had become not just about her music, but about inspiring others to find their own voice, to embrace their own talents, and to never let doubt or judgment define them. She also found herself reflecting on the changes within her. She had become more confident, not in an outward, flashy way, but in a quiet, enduring sense of self-assurance. She had learned that her worth was not defined by appearances, by judgment, or by fleeting approval. It was defined by her persistence, her honesty, and her willingness to show up for herself and her music, no matter the obstacles. As the months passed, she continued to perform, teach, and share her music. Each performance was a new opportunity to connect, to inspire, and to remind others of the power of perseverance and courage. She understood now that her story was larger than any single concert or audition. It was the story of a life lived with dedication, heart, and authenticity, and the music was simply the voice of that story. One quiet evening, she sat at her piano, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the small apartment where she had practiced for years, the nights of solitude, the doubts, and the moments of hope. She thought of her mother's encouragement, the people who had laughed or doubted her, and the moments of courage that had kept her moving forward. She smiled softly, realizing that every experience had shaped her, every challenge had strengthened her, and every note she played carried a piece of her journey. The sun was setting outside, casting a warm golden light across her piano. She placed her hands on the keys and began to play a gentle melody, not for anyone but herself, letting the music flow freely, expressing everything she had learned and everything she had felt. It was a quiet, beautiful reminder that life, like music, was about persistence, heart, and authenticity. Her story, her music, and her courage had left an imprint on the people she had encountered. She had proven that even those who are overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed can achieve extraordinary things when they remain true to themselves, and she had shown in the most beautiful way that the power of courage, passion, and honesty could resonate far beyond the boundaries of appearance, expectation, or time. She closed her eyes for a